Did you have trouble finding footage on the fighters on this upcoming card that I'm about to break down for you guys? Or maybe even for the Cage Warriors card, which goes down this weekend in Italy? Well, find out why close to 50 members now have subscribed to the MMA Fight Archive and trust your boy in terms of making sure that they get as many fights as possible on one page for them so they can do their studying, making sure that they leave no stone unturned. I'm the best in the world in terms of finding footage for all these fighters and putting it in one place so that you guys can just bookmark one spot, go there whenever you guys need to do studying, and ensure that you're getting every fight possible. There's a reason industry professionals trust your boy in terms of providing this information for them as well. And you can find out too with this free 7-day trial available with the link in the description below. Check out the MMA Fight Archive, and I promise it will come in even more handy during the Contender Series, which kicks off August 8th for a lot of these fighters that you may not even heard of. At least you'll know what to anticipate when they throw down in the Contender Series cage. Make sure you guys check it out. Once again, the MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below. Now let's get right into this podcast. Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week, we had two MMA Lockcast episodes. This is being the second of which, because we got a Bellator showdown this weekend, and obviously it's not just a Bellator card, it's a Bellator versus Rizin card, and Rizin is actually doing two events this weekend, and they're packaging it as one essentially, but we're going to strictly focus on the Bellator versus Rizin card, which starts off at 11 p.m. Eastern on Saturday night, so it'll go well past midnight Eastern time, but they got 5 fights for you guys where we mainly have Rizin fighters taking on Bellator fighters, and there's a couple very intriguing matchups on there as well, especially the lightweight World Grand Prix. I believe it's still the first round there, where we got Roberto De Souza taking on Patricky Pitbull. De Souza stepping in on short notice for AJ McKee, who unfortunately had to pull out due to staph infection, but De Souza is there to save the day. He is the current lightweight Rizin champion. Let's see if he can go out there and make it to the next round of the Bellator Grand Prix. We also have the Rizin flyweight title on the line between Kyoji Horiguchi and Makoto Shinryu. I'm going to be butchering that name. I apologize. Shinryu, I'm going to go with, or Makoto is what I'll go with. Very intriguing matchup there between the veteran Horiguchi and the rising hot prospect 16-1-1 Makoto Shinryu. A couple other intriguing fights, but I don't want to waste any more time. We did all the recaps for the previous UFC event on the previous UFC podcast, so make sure you guys check that out if you're looking for UFC 291 breakdowns. But if you're looking for Cage Warriors breakdowns, we got 15 fights in Italy going down there for Saturday afternoon. We got written breakdowns for you on the Patreon, link in the description below for that. If you're looking to get some early Saturday morning action down, that's where you guys will be able to find it. And Cage Warriors is definitely one of the best promotions in terms of my predicting. I believe in terms of the hit rate, I have the highest in Cage Warriors. Didn't go so well last week, but we'll hope to turn the tide this week and get back on the W train for Cage Warriors. All right. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the 5 fights that we got for Bellator versus Rizin. The first of which is a rematch between Andrei Koreshkov and Lorenz Larkin. Koreshkov is currently riding I believe it's a 4-fight unbeaten streak as of right now, after he had lost his last fight to his foe this weekend, Lorenz Larkin. That was a very closely contested split decision victory for Larkin. It was a very close fight. I thought that it either should have been a draw or at least Koreshkov winning rounds 1 and 3 to get his hand raised, but 2 judges scored that fight in favor of Larkin in round 2 and 3, ended up giving him the fight. But Koreshkov utilized a solid grapple-heavy game plan that night and was unable to get it going in the second round, but managed to get it going in the third round, but again, still ended up coming up short. He's starting to improve his striking game, which was already very good when they originally fought, but I think it's the confidence that's growing in him in the striking round, which will make him even more confident in this matchup. Larkin's on a very solid winning streak of his own after going 0-2 in his first 2 Bellator matchups. I believe he's on a 7-fight unbeaten streak right now. Looks very good, but the majority of those matchups coming up against fellow strikers who he can go out there and do his thing against. Obviously, he fought Koreshkov, and then he fought Muhammad Burkamov over his last 2 fights. And we saw in the first Burkamov fight what could happen if grapple-heavy approaches could actually be effective against Larkin. And I thought it was until that ill-fated elbow that stopped that fight and caused it to go to a no contest. In their immediate rematch, we saw Berkhamov play a little bit too much on the feet, and he ended up paying for it with one of the greatest knockouts in Lorenz Larkin's career, with a beautiful elbow on the exit from a clinch that face-planted Berkhamov and got Larkin the victory that night. But I think that this is going to be a solid matchup for Koreshkov to get back and get the revenge that I believe he deserves here over Larkin. I think his grapple-heavy approach will work perfectly, but I don't think we'll see him as desperate as he was in the first fight. I think we'll see him try to strike a little bit more, and he'll be safe from that distance to eventually change levels, close the distance, and get the fight to the ground where he can do solid work from on top. So I like Koreshkov, who was minus 200 in their first matchup. You can get him roughly around minus 120 now, and that's the side that I'm going to lean with here. Give me Andrei Koreshkov to kick off this Bellator versus Rizin card. Next matchup is a solid one between Danny Sabatello and Magomedov. Obviously, these guys were two guys that were eliminated from the Bantamweight Grand Prix, but had very good performances, although maybe Magomedov not so much. Over his last 3 fights now, Magomedov is 1-2, and the one fight that he won against Enrique Barzola was a fight that he was losing until he eventually got that 4th round submission victory. I think it was almost a Hail Mary guillotine that he hopped onto the neck of Barzola and was able to get it out of there. But the big kind of red flag for me in Magomedov's game is his lack of defensive wrestling. Like, I was expecting him to be a little bit more threatening against guys like Rafion Stotts and even Enrique Barzola, who was kind of taking him down with relative ease that night. And that's where I think that Sabatello is going to really start to shine in this fight. I think his pace and pressure is going to be too much for Magomedov to keep up with. And the fact that this is a 3-round fight, I could easily see Sabatello eating up those first 2 rounds pretty easily and then avoiding any type of submission, Hail Mary submission or Hail Mary knockout that Magomedov might have in store. Magomedov will obviously be the better striker here, but I think he's going to struggle in terms of keeping Sabatello off of him. Barzola is a great pressure and grappling fighter, but you're getting Sabatello, who's 10 times that in terms of what kind of pressure and grappling he brings to the table. So I fully expect Magomedov to drown in the pace and pressure of Sabatello here, while Sabatello goes out there and gets his hand raised by decision. Feeling pretty damn good about Sabatello here. I believe he opened up as the underdog, but now finds himself closer to that minus 180 range, on Wednesday or Thursday of fight week here. But I like Sabatello quite a lot in this spot. Next up, we got a women's bout here between Kana Watanabe going up against Vita Arteaga. Arteaga obviously coming up short in her last matchup against rising prospects Somiko Inaba. That seemed to be a perfect stylistic matchup for the prospect there, as Inaba was a technical, rangy striker who liked to move a lot, whereas Vita Arteaga is more so a brawler. She likes to crash the pocket, use her big strikes to break her opponents, to either draw out a desperation takedown where she can latch onto the neck and take it on home like she did against Vanessa Porto, or she just continuously moves forward and puts big power on her opponents and tries to knock them out or win the fight by decision like she did against Emily Ducati in the past. However, Watanabe is another level of grappling that I think that Arteaga is going to struggle too much with. That's the red flag in Arteaga's game. And Watanabe, we know the red flag in her game, right? Getting knocked out by Liz Carmouche in 30 to 40 seconds of their fight starting is a big red flag. However, I don't think that Arteaga is as dangerous with putting opponents away with her striking, which will allow Kana to close the distance without too much threat. She'll obviously eat a little bit of damage, but I think she'll be able to close the pocket, get that body lock, get the drag to the ground, and then from there, she'll be able to do what she does from on top. I think she is live to get a finish, whether it's a submission or TKO from that top position, but I think that Arteaga is going to struggle tremendously here with the strength and grappling of Watanabe, who, in my opinion, was robbed in her last fight against Ilima Lay McFarlane, a fight where it was 1-1 going into that 3rd round, but I thought Watanabe's grapple-heavy approach was more than enough for her to get her hand raised that night. We'll see if she can right that wrong this weekend and keep the judges out of it, which I think she'll be able to against Arteaga here. Give me Kana Watanabe by, let's say, submission, but inside the distance, not too bad either. Next up, we got Kyoji Horiguchi versus Makoto Shinryu. Again, this is for the vacant flyweight title in Rizin. Very fun fight here between a veteran and Horiguchi, who has been fighting at the highest level throughout his career over the last 8 to 9 years. He was on a 2-fight losing streak in Bellator. Obviously, he had that unfortunate loss to Sergio Pettis, which was for the bantamweight title. He was controlling the majority of that fight until he ran into a spinning back fist from Pettis, which put Horiguchi out clean. and then he ran into Patchy Mix, which was the perfect example of why Horiguchi should not be fighting at 135. Patchy Mix was too big for him, too strong for him, and he was able to get that fight to the ground whenever he wanted and controlled Horiguchi in those bad spots. But Horiguchi bounced back with 2 straight wins over his last 2 fights under the Rizin banner, earning him this shot to eventually get that Rizin belt. His opponent this week in Shinryu is a 16-1-1 prospect with a ton of potential. This guy already has a CFFC and Deep Impact title under his belt for the flyweight division, and he uses a grapple-heavy approach in a lot of his matchups. Now, I get it. The experience advantage is obviously in Horiguchi's realm here, but I think that Makoto shows a lot of potential, and this could be his coming-out party. At plus 300, I think he's worth a little bit of a sprinkle, although my final prediction will eventually be Horiguchi. I think the over 4.5 is not a bad spot either here, as I think the majority of this fight will take place in that grapple-heavy or grappling realm, where I think both guys will kind of negate each other, but I think there are opportunities for Shinryu to have success in terms of controlling Horiguchi and having some success of his own. But I think the experience is the big difference here, and Horiguchi will likely have the edge in that spot. But at minus 400, I just don't trust him against a kid in Makoto who looks like he's the goods and looks like he could be the next big Japanese star. So give me Horiguchi, but in terms of a bet and value, I think it's on the prospect here in Makoto Shinryu. But give me Horiguchi as the prediction. And my favorite prediction for that fight is going to be the over 4.5. All right, the main event of the Bellator versus Rizin portion of this card is going down between Roberto de Souza and Patricky Pitbull. Now, de Souza comes in on short notice here, but he's more than ready considering he's already over there in Japan, and I believe he was getting ready for another fight. But he's taking on Patricky Pitbull here in a clear grappler versus striker matchup. I think de Souza is a very skilled jiu-jitsu player, and I've heard about this guy for a long time, but this was the first time I actually got to really study him. You know, his only 2 losses in his career came against Johnny Case in a fight that he got. It was like an uppercut that landed right to the eye, and it seemed like de Souza did not like that at all, and he did tap out from that shot, but he managed to get his revenge as he did end up rematching Johnny Case and submitting him. He ended up coming up short against AJ McKee back in December, but it was a non-title fight, so he still held on to his lightweight title, even though he came up short in that matchup. But he had some solid success of his own that night against a very high-level fighter in AJ McKee. He is very difficult to deal with in the jiu-jitsu realm, and he does a great job in terms of closing the pocket with an overhand right and then getting into the body lock and eventually dragging these guys to the ground. Even if he ends up pulling guard, he's very good in terms of throwing up submissions and finding reversals to get into a dominant position so that he can get to work with his high-level BJJ. It's a thing of beauty to watch, and I'm very high on this kid. Patricky Pitbull, obviously the lesser of the Pitbull brothers, but a solid striker in his own right. I think the only reason we see him getting or having had the lightweight title in the past is the fact that his brother gave it up so that he could fight for it. And who did he fight? Peter Queally. Very easy matchup for him to go out there and get the win the way that he did. He's a striker with vicious leg kicks, but I think he struggles in the grappling realm, and that's where I think that de Souza is going to be able to come ahead here. I think this eventually opens up a submission opportunity for de Souza that he completely takes and is able to snatch up and get the victory here. The under and fight doesn't go to decision is not a bad chalky spot either, but I really think the grappling is where it's going to take place for de Souza, and I think he'll be able to get this down, whether it's hopping on the back of Pitbull or even getting a trip or a takedown to assert that top position. He'll be at a striking disadvantage, but Pitbull is nothing special in my opinion. I think it's more so his name and his experience in the Bellator cage that people respect more than anything, but I'm still going to be leaning on the de Souza side here, and I think he snatches up a submission and moves on to the semifinals of the lightweight Bellator Grand Prix. There you guys go. Breakdowns for all 5 fights of the Bellator versus Rizin card. Again, if you're looking for breakdowns for Cage Warriors this weekend, you can find written breakdowns from your boy on the Patreon. Link in the description below. Make sure you guys check that out. And if you want to do your own studying, check out the MMA Fight Archive. 7-day free trial available for that. Check the link in the description below for that as well. All right, I'll see you guys later today for the Locky 2-step and then tomorrow for the 3 best prop bets for UFC 291. Peace.